Picture this. It starts with a field. Flat, empty soil in the middle of North Dakota. Just 370 acres. It's ordinary. It's forgettable. Well, it's forgettable until you see who bought it. See, it wasn't a local farmer, not even an American company, but a Chinese agribusiness. And that land? Well, it just sits 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base, the hub for some of America's most advanced drone and satellite operations. So on paper, it's just a corn mill. You know, jobs, investment, growth. But when the locals started asking questions like, why here? Why now? And why so close to a U.S. military base? That's when agriculture started to sound a lot more like access. Because to the U.S. government, this wasn't about corn. It was about control. Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome to Midweek Sitrep, your bi-weekly briefing on what's going on in the world of national security. My name is Fowler, and I'm your host. Every other week, I give you the context you need to see what's going on so you can stay mission focused. Now, you might notice something a little different starting today. Midweek Sitrep episodes might run a little longer. So what does that mean? Well, it means more depth, more context, and more time to let things sink in. Instead of trying to fit these important topics into 20 minutes, I'm going to give it the space it needs to tell the full story. And like always, you're going to get Midweek Sitrep every other week. And if something urgent comes up in between, you'll get an episode of Brief. There's going to be more announcements coming over the next few months, and I got to tell you, I'm really excited to bring them to you. Because our mission hasn't changed. We're here to make sense of national security in a way that cuts through the noise and connects to your world. And in doing so far we've talked about a lot. We've talked about cyber, artificial intelligence, sanctions, export controls, the military, all of the traditional national security issues. But this show is about opening your eyes to something bigger, that nowadays everything is national security. And that includes your food. So today's Sitrep, we're going to talk about why foreign countries are buying up American farmland, how fertilizer has become a geopolitical weapon, and why the United States, known as the breadbasket of the world, might not be as secure as it seems. And before we get kicked off today, I just want to stop and say thank you to each and every one of you that listen to this, that watch the YouTube videos, that follow on social media, that subscribe to the Substack. There's so much coming in this next 6 months to a year that I'm really excited and looking forward to bringing it to you. And I hope you enjoy it. All right, let's get into it. Let's start with the dirt beneath our feet. Farmland isn't just real estate. It's sovereignty. It's water rights, crop production, and access to the U.S. food system. Whoever controls the land can control what grows or doesn't on it. Right now, foreign investors own about 40 million acres of U.S. farmland. That's an area nearly the size of the state of Florida. Let that sink in. 40 million acres. Now, much of that comes from allies like Canada or the Netherlands. But sprinkle in companies tied to China or other competitors, and suddenly that picture looks different. Take California's Palo Verde Valley. Saudi-owned companies are buying thousands of acres to grow alfalfa, one of the thirstiest crops in agriculture. But not for U.S. dinner tables. They do it to ship overseas to feed Saudi herds, all while California suffers historic drought. Now, this is the strategic reality. Control the land, you control supply. Control the water, you control survival. Place that land near sensitive infrastructure, and you don't just raise agricultural questions, you raise national security alarms. And when that happens, a similar name steps in, CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. Because even farmland now falls under the same national security lens as semiconductors, satellites, and AI chips. Which brings us back to that land deal in North Dakota. The company was Fufeng Group, a Chinese agribusiness giant. In 2022, they announced plans to build a corn milling facility on 370 acres in Grand Forks. The project promised jobs and tax revenue. On the surface, it looked like development for a quiet Midwestern city. But national security questions started piling up. The land was just 12 miles from Grand Forks Air Force Base, home to some of the U.S. military's most advanced drone and space operations. Now, was this really just about corn milling? Or could it provide a foothold for surveillance, espionage, or influence operations? That's when CFIUS got involved. That's the government body that reviews foreign investment for security risks. But here's the twist. CFIUS said it didn't have jurisdiction. The deal wasn't technically structured in a way that triggered their authority. So the project could have moved forward. Well, until the Air Force itself stepped in. In January 2023, the Air Force issued a blunt warning. This project was a significant threat to national security, and that killed it. So here's why this matters. This exposed how foreign land purchases can bypass existing review systems. It showed that even agricultural projects can raise alarms at the Pentagon. And it forced lawmakers to rethink. Should farmland near military bases be categorically off limits to foreign buyers? See, this wasn't just a land dispute. It was a wake-up call. Now let's move from the land to what goes into it. Fertilizer. Seeds alone don't feed the world. To turn soil into food, farmers need 3 critical ingredients: nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. Without them, the richest farmland in Iowa might as well be dust. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The United States doesn't control its own supply. Nitrogen comes from natural gas. When Russia throttled gas flows to Europe in 2022, fertilizer costs around the world doubled almost overnight. Farmers in Nebraska felt the shockwaves of a pipeline battle thousands of miles away. Phosphate is dominated by China. Beijing has restricted exports multiple times in recent years to keep prices down for its own farmers. And each time, global markets shifted overnight. The message was clear. When China tightens supply, the world feels the strain. Then there's potash. It's the soft underbelly. The US imports about 90% of what it needs, and the top suppliers are Russia and Belarus, 2 countries bound together, both willing to weaponize food supply as leverage against the West. Think about what that means. An Iowa corn farmer's ability to fertilize his fields doesn't just depend on the weather. It depends on decisions made in Moscow, Beijing, and Minsk. This isn't just about farming, it's about dependency. Because fertilizer isn't simply an input, it's a choke point. Whoever controls the fertilizer market controls the food chain. And whoever controls the food chain controls the people. Let's talk about how food is affected by geopolitics. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Belarus stood shoulder to shoulder with Russia. The US and the EU answered with sanctions aimed at Belarus. So on paper, these were political penalties. But in practice, they slammed into something far bigger. Potash, a cornerstone of global fertilizer supply. Now the impact was immediate. Fertilizer prices didn't just rise, they spiked, and in some cases more than 60%. Well, that means farmers from Iowa to India suddenly found themselves paying double to feed their soil. Some of them cut back planting, others spread thinner, using less fertilizer, and watching their yields shrink. And when yields fall, food prices rise. Bread in Cairo, rice in Lagos, corn in Des Moines. In fragile regions, that spark meant riots, political instability. In wealthy nations, it meant inflation, higher grocery bills, and mounting public anger. This is the hidden ripple effect of sanctions. You aim them at an authoritarian regime, but they reverberate across kitchen tables and markets worldwide. Because fertilizer isn't just a farm input, it's a pressure point, and whoever controls it holds leverage over the global food supply. Now let's take a break for a second. If this is the first time that you've ever thought about food as national security, you might have a few questions. Let's tackle 4 questions that you may have. The first, is foreign farmland ownership really that big of a deal? Don't we buy and sell property all the time? I would say yes, Americans buy and sell land constantly. But when foreign governments or state-linked companies buy U.S. farmland, especially near sensitive sites, it isn't just a real estate transaction. It's access, it's influence, and sometimes it's intelligence collection hiding in plain sight. Now the second question, fertilizer, really? Isn't this just an agriculture thing? Well, it is. But agriculture isn't just about farming. Think about oil in the 1970s. One embargo and the world economy was thrown into chaos. Fertilizer is the oil of food production. Without it, yields collapse, prices soar, and instability spreads. Third, can't the U.S. just make more fertilizer here at home? We could, and some argue that we should. But building fertilizer plants take years and billions of dollars, and often local communities resist them because of pollution and environmental risk. So for now, American farmers depend on global suppliers, many of them in countries we don't always trust. And fourth, why does this matter to me as a listener? I'm not a farmer. Well, that's because the ripple effects land on your plate. Higher costs from farmers mean higher prices in grocery stores. Fragile supply chains overseas can spark unrest that drags the U.S. into new crises. And for businesses, compliance officers, or policymakers, this means new risk, contracts, imports, and even investment can become national security flashpoints. Let's zoom out now. The United States isn't just feeding itself. It feeds the world. Corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, cargo ships loaded with American harvests cross every ocean, keeping shelves stocked from Cairo to Tokyo. To our allies, U.S. food exports are stability. To fragile governments, they're survival. And to millions living on the edge of famine, they're the difference between life and death. So no, this isn't just agriculture, it's strategy. Food is soft power in its purest form. But here's the reality. That power is fragile. Fertilizer disruptions shrink yields. When Russia invaded Ukraine, fertilizer prices spiked more than 60%. Farmers planted less, harvests shrank, and bread prices doubled in parts of Africa and the Middle East. Foreign farmland ownership restricts production. Thousands of acres in California grow alfalfa, not for American cattle, but for Saudi herds halfway around the world, all while U.S. reservoirs run dry. Shipping routes are choke points. A cyber attack on a port, a missile strike in the Red Sea, even a drought drying up the Panama Canal. And overnight, the flow stops. And when U.S. exports stumble, the world doesn't wait. Allies turn to Brazil, Russia, or China. Each lost shipment isn't just lost revenue, it's lost leverage. The kind you can't get back easily. Because in global politics, food isn't just calories, it's control. Maybe you're listening and thinking, all right, Jerry, farmland in North Dakota, fertilizer from Belarus, interesting. But again, I'm not a farmer. Let's talk about why this matters to me. Okay, let's talk about eggs. In 2022, egg prices in the US hit historic highs. People joked about eggs as a luxury item. Memes went viral, but behind the memes were a deeper story. Yes, avian flu wiped out millions of hens. That mattered. But the real story didn't stop at the chicken coop. Feed costs were climbing, driven by soaring fertilizer prices. Fertilizer prices were climbing because Russia invaded Ukraine and Belarus got sanctioned. That's geopolitics. But layer on top of that US trade policy, domestic regulation, and energy prices. Add in trucking shortages, diesel costs, and global shipping disruptions. And suddenly, what looks like a simple jump in the price of eggs is actually a case study in how food, energy, trade, and security are all wired together. So that $5 carton of eggs in your fridge, it wasn't just bird flu. It wasn't just fertilizer. It was the sum of every pressure point in a global system, showing just how fragile food really is. And it's not just with eggs. There's beef, bread, vegetables. Every aisle in the grocery store is tied to the same network. Regulation, trade, geopolitics, supply chains. Which means national security doesn't just show up on the battlefields, it shows up on grocery receipts. So let's put this all together. Land, fertilizer, exports. They aren't separate threads. They weave into the same fabric. Food is a weapon. Control farmland near a US base, and you're not just planting corn, you're planting risk. Control fertilizer exports, and you're not just raising cost. You're deciding which nations can harvest and which can't. Control shipping routes, and you're not just moving cargo. You're rationing survival. That's why food security isn't just a farmer's problem. It isn't even just an agriculture problem. It's a compliance problem for businesses, a policy problem for governments, and a national security problem for all of us. And here's the chilling part. These battles don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with sirens or missiles. They arrive through contracts signed quietly, land deeds transferred quietly, fertilizer shipments withheld quietly. But the impact? It's anything but quiet. Because in this century, power isn't only measured in missiles or markets. It's measured in acres, and in supply chains, and in calories. The next time you drive past an empty field, walk a grocery store aisle, or sit down to dinner, remember, food isn't just food. Behind every seed, every bag of fertilizer, and every container of grain, there's a struggle for power. And the front lines of that struggle aren't oceans away. They're here, on American farmland, in fertilizer markets, in shipping lanes, and yes, in the price of groceries at your local store. Because the story of food is the story of control. Control the land, control the water, control the inputs, control the exports. And you don't just influence markets. You influence nations. You shape politics. You decide who thrives and who starves. That's why food security is national security. And if you miss that, you miss the bigger picture. That's it for today's Midweek Sitrep. If this episode got you thinking, don't let the conversation stop there. Head over to the Insider Brief on Substack and subscribe. It's where we dig deeper, answer your questions, and preview what's next. We're also on YouTube, where you'll find short clips, interviews, and bonus content. Make sure to subscribe there if you haven't already. And if you want to support the show, go to everythingisnationalsecurity.com and check out our merch. Every shirt and hat helps keep Midweek Sitrep independent and growing. Subscribe, share, and stay sharp. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. Midweek Sitrep with Jerry Fowler is an independent production of OpScent Media Group, LLC. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions based upon the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host, Jerry Fowler, and any guest, and do not reflect the official policy, position, or endorsement of any current or former employer, client, government agency, military organization, educational institution, or any other entity for which the host, Jerry Fowler, may be affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are provided for informational purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. All discussions are based upon publicly available information and personal expertise. Everything's national security. OpScent Media Group, LLC.